Or if anyone comes to the meeting, they're more than welcome. We'll give them some, paper to provide those. That's pretty much it.
All right, then we will toss the ball to, here's the way I like to do this before I toss the ball to Mr. Freeze. He's gonna just give us a general overview, probably a review of the executive summary that we did. And then I'd just like to go around the room for each commissioner. And when it's your turn to speak, ask any questions you got and make any recommendations you'd like to make. Again, we need to keep this pretty net because we got about an hour and 49 minutes to get through that, so we can get the other piece.
All right. I realized I forgot to bring my copy of the executive summary. Can I borrow you for a second? Oh, is that, yeah, thank you. All right, but this is pretty straightforward. What we have before us this evening is our procedures manual. This is a document that we've created primarily because the zoning ordinance as adopted does not include within it the required submittals that come with any kind of application or timelines or anything like that, right? Which was on purpose. We moved those things out of the ordinance so that we can more readily adjust and change those things administratively in the future. But in moving them out of the ordinance, we had to put them somewhere. So that's the primary purpose of this document. So it includes within it submission requirements, notice requirements, and then it has a section as well on community engagement. It also is going to host our fee schedule for all our permit applications. So some of the key things that are in there. Hope folks pay attention to the concept of the development plan. That is going to be kind of a workhorse for our review processes going forward. The development plan is the document where we're specifically going to be reviewing compliance with zoning. So if you think of the final site plan as essentially a collection of plans, the final site plan basically incorporates within it a development plan where your zoning has been reviewed and consistency found with zoning, a stormwater plan, same thing, consistency found with stormwater, and a public improvements plan, which is basically your public infrastructure, streets, sidewalks, utilities. Each of those planning documents is approved, then they all come together into a final site plan document. In part of what doing that, breaking those up in that way does is it allows us to try and get at the zoning compliance first, while before a developer has made significant investments in the engineering side of their development, we can talk about zoning, because one of the things you guys probably know very clearly on the zoning side is that there's a lot more opportunities for administrative waivers, modifications, and then other forms of waivers and permits and stuff like that. And there's a lot more opportunity to kind of talk about what's the best way of reaching compliance on one issue or another. And we want to be able to have those conversations before a significant investment has been made on the engineering side of the project.
James, quick question, the development plan.
Yes.
Does that include a section or some type of, you mentioned it, site plan, stormwater, is there anything to deal with height or setbacks?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Is there anything, or a section or anything to deal with the overall height proposed for the development?
Well, the development plan is, I mean, we do. Development height is almost always going to be addressed in the building application itself,
Okay.
building permit application, because that's generally where we get into vertical construction. There's certainly an opportunity within the context of the development plan to say, hey, this is the height that we're looking to get at. We just encourage people to submit elevations at that point in time so that we can address zoning related issues.
Okay, because you're just saying that the development plan is going to be the mechanism that we review for compliance to the zoning, and so I was just curious how the height.
Yeah, but I'm also recognizing there are some things that, some zoning aspects that will end up being confirmed at the building permit application level.
Okay. But this comes before, so they would get a go ahead with the compliance, development plan compliance in order to move towards it, or is it?
Let me finish this and let's go to round table and it's no worries. one of the aspects here to keep in mind also is that state law requires that we also be able to, that we also allow for someone to go straight to the final site plan phase, so one can also skip straight to that phase, they have that option. I don't know.
So as an
Dive into-
incentive, you're, if I'm understanding,
Yeah.
kind of follow up, as an incentive, you're providing. If you go the development plan route first,
Yes,
you get to submit and get an approval for that, you get to submit a building permit.
application
Application
simultaneously with the final
with the
site plan,
site.
yeah.
And if you just go final site plan, you have to wait for it.
I don't think that's right.
Which is our current standard. The other thing I'd noted though is for projects that are subject to a minor development plan, those we're encouraging folks to submit everything all at once, including that building permit application. Because a site plan, under the concept of this zoning ordinance, right? Because this document is only implementing the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance contemplates something called a site plan for all development activity. And the reason for that is it's recognizing that under our current ordinance, there isn't something that is specifically called out to regulate and review zoning. Right now, people submit a building permit application, which is specifically designed for the review of compliance with the building code. And we do a zoning verification based on that document. All we're doing at this point is specifically calling out something called a site plan with a development plan component of it to do the zoning review, so that site plan is tied to zoning review. And we're not making the building permit kind of do double duty there. But we want to try and maintain as much consistency with the existing process as possible. So we're accepting those application materials all at once.
Right, so Rory just got here. We got a hard stop at 7 because he's got a meeting to go to. And what we're gonna do is just go around the room and ask questions and make recommendations. And since you tend to be the most thoughtful, I thought we'd start with you. and get
Me?
recommendations.
I only read this thing in the last hour. I guess. You could yell at the window and someone walking by, guys, come on. See y'all. My main thing, I guess, is with the minor development plan, we say basically that a layman can do it. But then we require a lot of things that a layman cannot do, presumably. And sometimes those things are important. And then sometimes they don't seem super important. For example, let's say I own a house on 2 acres. And I want to add a 600-foot, oh, that's a major, sorry, a 400-foot square foot addition to the back. Do I have to go get, personally, I guess, survey every tree on my property to get that?
You want to sit down?
Really, I will. Yeah, to get that tree requirement in there.
For the minor one, you get most of the way to the alphabet in enumerating.
Say
Are you-
lands.
Are you removing those
That's a landscape.
trees?
Nope, not affecting the trees.
8-inch caliper grader.
Okay, then you should be okay.
But it. Okay, this is actually, I guess, in the major one. If I'm, oh wait, no, yeah, existing landscape features as defined, including all individual trees of 8-inch caliper or greater. Like, is there some way of saying like, you only have to do these things within the general area in which you're proposing to do stuff?
Yeah, I mean. You're, at this point, I'm happy to take the comments and feedback, right?
Mhm.
I feel like you're kind of putting me on the spot here to try and respond on this.
No.
When taking the comments and feedback, and I appreciate the comments and feedback, we are seeking to make the minor development plan in particular a more readily doable document.
Yep.
If one of the challenges you're identifying is in the landscaping element, that's happy to take the feedback. I also will note that at the beginning of that section, it notes clearly that the zoning administrator has the discretion to eliminate any aspect of that submission.
how do you know that you're going to not require it? Because I didn't have a pre-app meeting for this, right?
Right.
So can I have a pre-app meeting? Is that allowed?
Yeah.
And then you'll
we-
say, this is what I want from you.
We anticipate, under our current, how things currently run, it's very rare for a document just to show up. An applicant has reached out to a planner prior to submitting something. We've had conversations about what we're expecting when you submit. So
Okay,
we're anticipating that under the new process too.
okay.
That you've at least reached out to a planner, you're not cold submitting.
It might be helpful to put in there some language of like, we encourage you to do that, to go talk to us.
And I think the point remains well taken, that for the minor development plans, these need to a certain degree mirror the existing process. If we're talking about a small addition, there is likely not going to be a pre-application meeting. So we do need to make sure that we're cognizant of that.
Yeah, and even on a major one, like if I wanted to add a 600-foot addition, I feel like you wouldn't want me to have to survey every tree,
Right, are you, yeah.
which I guess it still may in that section.
Well, so one thing about, I mean, we'll have to kind of figure that part out as we go along, but there is a requirement in the new code that all lots have landscape requirements, and so we're trying to navigate this new permit. We're also trying to navigate this new requirement for single family lots too. So we anticipate a work in progress, but all of these discussion points are really helpful as we're, trying to fly the plane and go and put it together as we go.
Yeah, I mean, totally reasonable. I wonder if we could maybe put in language just like, you need to put in enough of this stuff to show that you met the requirement. And then like, not necessarily everything, right? Like, I would have to say I have enough trees that I hit 20%, and then I can stop counting trees, something like that. For the trees, they're not all trees, but it's just what I'm using. Similarly, is it F? F is like indicative residential units or sale or rental, number of bedrooms, all that stuff. All of that applies if I'm subject to the affordability requirement or using the affordability bonus. But it doesn't actually say it only applies in that case.
You're having a sunroom, do I have to go through all of this? Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and then sort of similar subject like, area that matters, but like. I feel like things are gonna get real weird once you have a bunch of sublots and then someone who owns a sublot wants to do something that has nothing to do with all the other sublots. Easy when it's some person doing something on the whole zoning lot and maybe making sublots out of it. But then like, if I'm. Keep using the tree example, do I have to start looking at my neighbor's trees and counting those and surveying those in order to make a change? I mean, sometimes you have tree requirements out of the whole zoning lot, so maybe.
Yeah, there's a lot that we're gonna be working through on the sublots in terms of how.
For
those-
sublots, we talked about the fact that a sublot is different than a zoning lot. So the zoning lot needs to meet the requirements. And so, yes, they will be working with their neighbors on things that would affect the zoning.
It's a trade-off there because on the one hand, we're opening up an opportunity for ownership where that would not otherwise be available. Or would only be available through an expensive condominialization process. On the other hand, it comes with essentially long-term restrictions on the use of those sublots and kind of how you have to work them.
Yeah. This is an easy one. In section 2.2.1, we have a number 6 and a number 11. There's nothing in those. Zoning map amendments. I think we got an email about this, but we're requiring both mapping diagrams and elevations. I feel like the massing diagram is actually a pretty reasonable thing to require. Elevation seems a little much. with the caveat that like, in some cases, whether it gets approved might, like it might help to have an elevation.
I mean, it's an interesting
We're
point.
gonna need that because the code requires the transparency and some of the massing and scale aspects as part of the initial zoning.
Well, that's true, but on a rezoning, we're making a legislative decision and that checking against those things will come back in when you're
When you
doing.
come back in
when
again,
you're
yeah.
doing the later reviews. But the point, so we can, I think we can come back and put our heads together about considering taking those, turning those into mains or, optional submissions.
Mhm.
But the point, it should be recognized that I think in just about every rezoning we've seen, we do see massing and elevations.
I feel like we usually have massing, I don't know about elevation, like thinking about like the Langford one, like we had just like the blank buildings and no
Sure.
architectural detail. I would say that's even true, well, no. I guess like we would have had elevations for like 240 Sherwood, like that, some of them anyway. I don't know. On a similar note, requiring the development plan for your SUP submission.
Site plan is currently required for an SUP
They're
submission,
quite a
Okay.
bit less.
Fair enough.
so it is a lot less.
Um. Anyone else have one they wanna go? Or- I mean, I've got
Yeah, why don't we,
a list, but-
let's.
I've got one that's easy on page 8 for entrance course application referred to the ERV. The dates, the start times, the end times, when the clock restarts, somebody's got to go in there and write 4 extra sentences to make it clear.
On the ERBs.
Yeah, so following the submittal of a complete application is yet undefined. The ERB will have 60 days from the application deadline, not the submission date, but the deadline, whatever that is, to take action within the first 2 consecutive ERB meetings following the deadline, which may be more than 60 days between after those. Following the first meeting, the ERB may approve or deny the COA or defer action to the next ERB meeting, at which time the ERB must approve or deny the COA. And this 60 days, complete application deadline, submittal, when does the clock start, when does it stop? And if you read this in one way, you can't get to the second meeting in a lot of cases, because it might be 100, it might be way more than 60 days by the time you get to the second. So I just think somebody needs to go back and de-word salad those 2 sentences.
What could be helpful for this and others, I don't know if we have the ability to do like a little diagram chart with like the dates and, the process for each one.
There is the
Oh, and
last page is a collection of dates.
yeah, and then also on the same, this is not the Charlottesville Affordable Dwelling Unit Monitoring and Procedures Manual, despite the fact that it says that on the bottom of every page.
Yes, we received that
Yeah.
comment.
Yeah. I see those starts all the time, for like a few months out.
All right, you going back.
Since we're talking about diagrams, I hate to ask this, but like a chart of like which types of plans depend on other plans, like. Your development review is a development plan plus a,
Yes, no, check, is this required, isn't this required? Yes.
yeah.
Flow
You see what I'm
chart,
saying?
yeah.
It could get sort of like a table of authority, yeah. I don't know, I feel like I could make a pretty intense flow chart out of it, depending on how many moving parts there are, but. In reading it, it started to get confusing, and maybe that would be easier, I don't know. That probably doesn't have to be part of the manual, but we could just do it later,
Yeah.
put it on the internet.
Remember, part of the advantage of the administrative manual is that it can be updated regularly as we develop out our new process.
Mhm.
So, I don't know,
We have, yeah, I'll interrupt if it gets out of hand, go for it.
I think Ashley Davies mentioned this too. What's up with the public meetings and the transportation?
So it's a transportation demand management plan. Right, it's a new section that has never existed before,
Uh-huh.
and it asks a developer if you have a project that's over 50,000 square feet, to provide a plan for mitigating or reducing the impacts on your local transportation and parking systems,
Okay,
right? So we are simply asking in this instance that they have a meeting with the community and talk about those transportation and parking.
so this is sort of a stalking horse to give the developer an opportunity to perhaps explain that my 40 cars entering and leaving this parking lot are actually not going to impact the congestion on this road.
And look for, and maybe there's some solutions, maybe in that conversation, they can identify some solutions to parking or transportation needs within the local neighborhoods that they can carry forward in their plan.
Right.
It's also an opportunity for the community to learn about the project itself, right? It's kind of like,
It's clearly geared towards larger projects.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I would hope that it's not just limited to the scope of the TDM plan, even though it's because of the TDM plan,
Well,
because that's just a proxy for it's a big
Yeah,
project, let's
yeah.
talk about it.
Yeah, I noted that. Is this a proxy or a stalking horse for having a more general meeting, really? And are we, the transportation management, when we're that big, we're actually sort of demanding a public meeting of some sort?
Yeah.
If it's that big, guess what you're having, even if there's some other way to not, yeah.
I mean, I thought it was fine to have
Yeah,
a public
okay.
meeting for large projects. It's not like it's
It had some other.
hearing.
yeah,
It's,
it is pretty big.
Yeah, that's-
if you're developing 50,000 square feet, you can get yelled at by your neighbors if you're doing it badly.
So this minor major historic review. If you appeal the administrative review, then the DAR treats a minor as a major. Okay, and then is 221 a description of the minor? I mean, I don't think we have a clear distinction between minor and major. We have a general description of general requirements.
What page you on?
I'm on 6 and 7. And then we just have a minor historic review. Are you saying that everything on this list in general requirements is a minor, and how's the distinction between a major? Yeah, I'm sort of getting lost into what applies to what.
I don't know if you want to look at this. I think the list is for both, maybe.
I think as it was
It's not really
written,
clear.
there was the notion that the list was for both. I think it would be a fair comment to read back that are there some of these things that are more applicable to a major? And should we do separate lists?
Yeah, or,
In the top, it says to meet with staff before.
Yeah. It does say that. Remember, the minor is the staff review.
right,
Major is something that's going to the BAR or the ERB. Well, actually, all ERB it begins as staff. It gets called up.
right, but that
Yeah.
distinction isn't clearly made at the outset.
It does start from the assumption that the first thing somebody's looked at in this is the ordinance itself, but a reminder that minor is a staff review and a major is a BAR review.
Well, I mean, if we're looking at this as a hand holding device, they're gonna start holding the hand first, and then they're gonna dive into, yeah.
Hopefully they'll call the preservation planner first. That'll probably make everything easier.
Yeah, but I'm sure he's gonna
He's used to that.
he's gonna get really tired of a canned response to.
Yeah.
No, ignore 6, 7 and go to here, you know.
Well, and it's to our advantage then to go say,
Yeah.
like the requirement or the suggestion of doing a model.
Yeah.
We're probably not gonna do that on minor in
Yeah.
any instance, so we could put that in the list with the major.
Right. And
That's where
then,
your diagram.
Sadly, we're only allowing digital models now. They used to be able to come to us with a little physical model like in the 60s.
Like a carve out in there that said Rory.
Old James Bond, sort of floating up from the
Since
table.
we're on the topic of the 3D model, can we clarify that sentence to be two-dimensional representations of the 3D model?
Or
Because
we
we've had, the
holograms.
public has come in before and said, well, you need to bring in a 3D model, or you need to bring in a
Hologram.
SketchUp model that we can play with on the computer, and that's not, the purpose is to just have 2D representations of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with that.
We were gonna buy the BAR we were gonna buy the BAR a bunch of VRN sets. Well, you said that.
Fun, but I would hate to be the architect doing that project.
So, yeah, on development plans, minor, and I'm sort of a little piggybacking on Lori, is there a threshold we can find where the development plan really is a token review? Like, for a 400 square foot addition to a single, to my existing dwelling. I mean, how much detail do we really need in a circumstance like that? I'm just bumping out my living room into my backyard a bit.
And our expectation, and Matt, jump in at any point on this as well, but our expectation is that because we've not said it needs to be prepared by an engineer, architect, or a surveyor, or anything like that, is that someone can submit a relatively simple plan that shows their boundaries, which is essentially what we get today. Showed, they've written in, 4 feet this way, 20 feet this way, 4 feet back,
It looks like it fits the setbacks to me. What do you think?
right? And we've measured these setbacks.
Our anticipation is we're trying to, this is like a glass, we're trying to fill the glass up all the way with what you could have in a minor before you go to major. So it was either cutting it into like 6 different categories or having it be everything up to the level written down is minor, but it doesn't mean, it's not saying you have to provide everything. It's saying it may include this information.
Yeah.
So it's everything up to that information.
Yeah. Maybe a little more clarity in that in this. I mean, you do say may and shall and all that, but maybe a little more
What are
clarity.
you gonna say?
Can we also get some clarity on, I don't know what that, sorry, I don't know why I can't talk tonight. What the cutoff is between a major and minor development plan, 'cause it says residential projects of less than 2 units or addition of 500 square feet.
2 or less.
I think it's about to be 2 or.
Right, but, yes, up at 2, but the thing is,
Building 2 units.
2 units is much bigger than 500
Yeah,
square
I have
feet.
the same question.
Right.
So
Small ones.
is it,
Yeah, it sounds.
Is
like
it
you
and
got
or?
I'm confused.
Like,
We definitely, I think, could have a conversation, get feedback on that 500 square feet, because that is a little more trying to get into that realm of additions. The 2 units, you start to trip stormwater regulations. So we were trying to use that threshold for everything that could be not have to go under stormwater regulations. Because that's tied to residential unit count. Once you go 3 units, more than 3 and more units, you start to get into providing stormwater management plans, ENS plans. So there is kind of a higher threshold on that.
Is that, so isn't that also like 6,000 square feet? So is it 6,000 and 2 units or
No,
anything that's 3 units, no matter how much disturbance, needs a full stormwater?
Yes.
so would the language instead be projects of 2 units or less? Or a major development plan would be anything more than 2 units or a commercial addition greater than 500 square feet?
We definitely can look at that. I mean, I think there's some,
If you add 1,000 square foot addition
That's
to
big
a
units.
single family house, is that a major or a minor?
That's a lot. We don't usually see that.
Well, let's
size
play out,
addition.
yeah, I agree, but let's play out the example. Right now, that's as written as a major, but I think I certainly would welcome thoughts on where would you guys see the cutoff?
if you do that, but it's 2 units, it's a minor. Or is it also still a major?
No,
If it's the 1,000 square feet addition, but in this other example.
that's a good point. So I've got a single family house. Let's play this out. Now, we got a single family house and adding 1 more unit to it.
so your 2 units.
And let's say it is 700 square feet of an addition onto the house, but we're at 2 units. Is it a minor or a major?
I still think it would be minor, but you would run into stormwater having to do in lieu of. You'd have to do something because you're over 6,000 square feet. So there would be a stormwater plan, how detailed that plan is. And that gets back to this concept that's going to be very different, where we're going, having a development plan which deals with zoning regulations. But at the end of the day, before you get a land disturbance permit or a building permit, you have to have a site plan. And that site plan is a collection of all these documents. Some of these documents might be a checklist. It might be just a check. It might just be, that you've done it, but you still need a site plan at the end of the day before you can get a land disturbance permit.
Stormwater at zoning or stormwater at site plan?
Stormwater at site plan. So how we anticipate this is stormwater is not in the development plan. It needs to be considered. And this comes into more when we're talking about larger developments. I know jumping ahead from the question, but if you had commercial development on that development plan, you know you're gonna need to provide some sort of detention. So you're not designing the detention at the development plan level, you are showing this, I'm gonna have detention in this general area. Public Works Engineering will review it, they'll provide comments, basically saying, you know, you're gonna have to have quality quantity. You're gonna have to have all these things as you get into your stormwater management plan, which will be a standalone plan, but it'll at least be shown in the development plan, but it won't be detailed out. So it should be something that would help the developers, again, get through that easier. Okay, I know I need to do stormwater detention. This is generally where it's going to be. I have my development plan that's doing all my zoning checks. I get that development plan. Now I can move into these other documents that I'm going to need before I get that land disturbance permit.
So let me interrupt for a minute. Yeah, are there any more questions about minor versus major? Because I do want to go back to Michael, because we cut Michael off earlier.
Well, I'm not sure we finished answering
No.
the last question about what the distinction is between
Minor
when
versus-
you do minor versus.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're going to land that, and we need to let Michael back in the game, because we cut him off earlier, so.
And to, yes, the confusion on that, and do we envision, you were talking about checklists, I mean, it seems to me that the burden from going from 2 to 3 units on a residential lot is pretty dramatic. Therefore, if we're dealing with residential lots and going from 2 to 3 units, do we anticipate, pulling together some plug and play tools? Here's the easiest way for you to do your stormwater. Here's the straightforward, sort of to make it so that if you want to build a driveway, all of a sudden you don't have to hire an engineer or an architect just to navigate this.
Yeah, I don't know that I can say I've specifically gone into this, saying that about stormwater.
Well, I
think
mean,
that's an
whatever.
idea. That idea in other realms, and we'll touch on this a little bit in the presentation as they have asked me to put together for the end of this. But that idea of how do we make this easier for the smaller scale project, because those are the ones that are gonna most struggle with these issues, right? Because they don't have the revenue.
Right, you don't have an extra 20 grand lying around to deal with this stuff.
And, there's a variety of places where we can explore those types of tools. A tree canopy is gonna be one of those, I think, making it easier to measure tree canopy. Standardize a canopy per stem rule, so I don't have to depend on what my. Right now, we ask people to project 10 years from now, the canopy, who do you hire to tell you what the canopy is gonna be 10 years from now? I don't know how they do that today. But if we can standardize that,
Master tree list just says how big it'll be per tree, per
Oh.
type of tree.
so there you go.
You just say, I'm gonna have a 26-foot tall tree here in 10 years because it says.
Because it says so, right, but that's the idea, right? That's how we simplify these rules for application, particularly for the smaller scale projects.
And something well, I think this will come over time, just something to Sherpa people through that.
Yeah, when I was in Hampton, we had the Chesapeake Bay Act. And it had enhanced stormwater requirements above and beyond what we have today here, but one of the things we did is we developed a standard landscaping unit. It was a unit, and it basically said, all right, when you run the calculations, you need 3 units, and each unit consists of 2 bushes and a tree. That's what you need to put on. And so it was standardized, and it was plug and play.
The language that I've been wordsmithing for the development plan minor, replacing up to 2 dwelling units on 1 lot. My suggestion was to match it part of the zoning code would be up to 3,000 square foot footprint. Just to use the same language consistently.
Yeah, I also feel like the non-residential part should be footprint based as well, right?
Because the code you just went from.
And when you're thinking about land disturbance, I mean, if I'm adding an addition to my house, right, I'm not disturbing any more land because it's twice as tall.
Yeah, what if we just go up? What if I just bump up my attic? And add 500 square feet? I mean, does any of this apply other than getting my Class B contractor in there with a building permit and whacking away?
Depends on if it's visible, there's transparency requirements under the new code, so it does need to be looked at.
Right, but am I counting trees in that circumstance?
I thought that's ground floor only.
Depends on,
With districts.
yeah, but let's, But there's also the question of what gets reviewed at the building permit versus the development plan. Where are we at?
Well, we ran in, one of the things that is working around is under the code, under the new code, it talks about needing these development plans when you do construction. And then it defines construction. And so it is a lot broader than what we have dealt with in the past. Because a lot of these things would have been handled under building permit. When you just submit a building permit, you never deal with a planner, you're submitting a building permit. And zoning and buildings, looking at things like setbacks, square footage, things like that. That is now a little bit larger. We're hoping to keep it as smooth, but it now involves that within a development plan. So yes, we were at least anticipating a majority of these development plans the minor would not include all this information. We have it down here just because we are trying to catch everything, because we tend to, if it's not written down, tends to be where the fight comes in if we need that information. So it's a lot easier for us to subtract information as we're looking at a development plan than it is to say, well, we also need this information too.
Yeah, I think that also goes back to what's a completed application and what's a submittal, because they can make a good faith effort at, well, most of this doesn't apply, does it? And you say at first glance, yeah, this probably doesn't apply, and then it does. Is that a complete application or isn't it?
For the small stuff, I think we will get into we have a good example of how we used to do things. So I think
You just gotta adapt it and play with it.
And procedurally, with the new permitting software, the first step in every permit when it comes into that software is a review for completeness. And I would argue that if we get through that review for completeness and we say this application is complete, however we arrive at that conclusion, if we then later say, oh no, we needed this, I would not turn around and remove and say you've no longer met this first step.
Right.
Like once the review for completeness is complete and we've said you're complete, off we go, we're not gonna backtrack from that.
and I think our threshold will be fairly low for this minor stuff. I don't think it's gonna be the larger stuff that we're looking to make sure we can do an actual review of a project.
Yeah, which. And this may be dragging us farther away from getting to answer to Michael's questions, but with the resubmits on these plans, we've got this. If you resubmitted and you've got 3 different ones, now you've got a full boat new application fee going. I think some of Charlie Armstrong's comments on that were had some merit, which is, well, fine, but if you're gonna do that, everybody has to weigh in on the first submission and be done with weighing in on the first submission. Or else, I need a checklist to fix.
No new comments.
Yeah.
Which is an issue we've been discussing at length and understand, like there's no new comments. Now, obviously, if the plans change in some way, you can make new comments on the.
Right, your
changes
new
in the
answer to my
plan.
problem, answer the question asked generates more questions. That's
That's a
fine.
different scenario than just straight up, oh, we didn't look at this and now we are.
And I do think this is one area I do think our new tracking software will, with OnBase, which is very similar to Bluebeam, it will be able to track changes. You have overlay, which of course we don't have now. We have paper copies. We're looking at submittal 1 and submittal 8. And
stone knives and bear skins. We gotta do better than that, right?
but I think with OnBase, that issue should help be resolved.
Right,
So on the division between minor and major, the recommendation I heard was to look at, what did we say? Footprint. Yeah.
Yeah, 3,000 square
get
feet.
it again, how, research, say it again.
Up to 3,000 square foot in footprint, up to a footprint of 3,000 square feet.
We can also look at footprint. We'll take a look at some options on footprint, because the point that was made earlier that if you can do 2 units and that's a certain amount of square footage, and the addition is less than that, there's a issue there that the two should be somewhat synonymous. The other thing I wanna, Matt raised the issue that we drew the line on 2 units because that's synonymous with the stormwater. I just wanna open the door, any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so my understanding of the stormwater ordinance is that we are more restrictive than state law in what qualifies as needing it.
We do.
In that state law is like an acre or two, and then we say 6,000 square feet.
It's the size, but the unit
But-
count is
State-
like
State
that's,
law says if it's 2 units or under, you have to exempt it, but that
Right.
doesn't say that we can't exempt more. And I wonder if it makes sense to raise that to something like 4, given.
I don't know
that it would
whether
be
you're
super-sized
accurate
building.
on the, I've always understood to be that what the state law says is when you get over 2 units, you have to do
You have to do
stormwater,
it.
but if.
Oh, even if it's not 6,000 square feet, that's.
Right.
Okay, never mind, yeah.
But we've said that our environmental regulatory program is something that we need to look at. We said that about a year ago now, and now we're past the last big project and looking at our next big projects. But I just kind of want to put on the table because frankly, because Charlie raised it as one of his items. He talked about a minor development being at 6 units. I think 6 units is a bit high, but I wanted to see if you guys had any reaction to that.
Is,
Footprint.
2 units
Just
is
straight up
also,
footprint based and get away from units entirely.
is that the cutoff in the residential building code as well? 2
Yeah,
For
units?
certain things, yes.
Yeah.
So, and at that point, when you go above that, you have to have a design professional doing the drawings anyways. But it would make sense that below that, you wouldn't want to force someone to get a design professional if they don't have to have one. So,
On the other hand, if you've got a duplex and you're adding a 3rd unit,
I think.
you're gonna have to do, from a building code standpoint, you're in a different category
Yeah.
because you're more than the 2 units.
Well, unless they're townhouses and then they're
Then
still
you're in a
IRC.
completely different.
True, or they could all be cottages and then they're all IRC and they don't even touch each other. They just happen to be on one lot.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, does going to the IBC mean any of this, like, obviously your building permit requirements change, but like, does that really warrant more development code review?
Well, we're trying to make the development plan mirror the document that people are currently submitting with their building permits.
Yeah, okay,
And so the smaller levels, meaning that you can do your hand sketch drawing with your ruler and such to still provide that ability and then have the documentation that they need from the building standpoint. So we were trying to keep that as much as possible because folks are gonna hear, oh, everyone requires a development plan and like flip out.
Yeah.
Because that's brand new, but really we're framing it as, okay, when you do a building permit, you have to have a site drawing anyway.
Mhm.
So let's get that framed site drawing with the new requirements in the code and then deal with the building code stuff at the same time. So we're trying to make that was what we were attempting to articulate.
that makes sense to me. I guess I've never seen a building permit.
I think we give you
So-
much of what you need on this one, so let's, I know it's driving your questions, I want you to be right.
Oh, no, it's okay. I actually think a lot of the stuff we're talking about was getting to the point of why I asked about it, is that there's a lot of kind of fuzzy zones. And so just submitting a site plan without understanding the verticality of it, it's hard to judge whether or not it conforms to zoning alone, I feel, so. And I was just, part of what I was asking too, because we were talking about some of these size footprints and does that not apply to, if it's a 500 square foot addition, but like you said, it goes up multiple stories. It's not clear to me. It seems like the development plan submission is maybe missing a massing or some rudimentary stacking diagram.
Yeah, it's not specifically stated, but on E. On the minor, I think it's in the minor development plan, says lot size, density, coverage, building setback, built to dimensions, parking location, height massing. I'm assuming that's another way to say, give us an elevation drawing, you have that produced. But having a clear, like, language on the actual, like, what drawings you're requiring, I think might make it easier.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like. You like, I feel like we need to, I mean, we kind of talked about this, but like the pre-app step of like, you go to a planner or go on the internet and you say, I want to build a thing here, this is the basic thing I want. And I feel like you just need a checklist sent back to you of like, oh, you need this one, and this one, and then you know what to ask your general
Yeah,
contractor.
some sort of navigator
Mhm.
or pilot, role.
Yeah,
And
I
maybe
mean,
that's an employee who's designated to do that.
Yeah.
and Sort of do a little,
or just a
traffic
list of, if
control.
you're in this neighborhood, you go to this planner.
Yeah.
Or even just a web form and someone figures it out, I don't know.
but just to sort of simplify it so that you're not wondering,
Yeah,
do I have to do these 19 things or only 4 of them?
I've been in other municipalities where you establish that conversation early and it does kind of change, because then you realize that you guys are resources for
Mhm.
people to make sure they don't make a wrong turn. And I think that changes the dynamic as opposed to being gatekeepers to what they're trying to get done. It's sort of more like, no, we're here to kind of.
Yeah.
This streamline and save.
So Carl, what's next?
One thing is, just, I guess maybe some clarity on this process, or maybe we'll just figure this out as we go, but, I mean, currently it seems like, the site plans get submitted so far ahead of the permit, not just because you have to, but also because it takes so much longer for the site plan to be approved, than the building permit. And I'm wondering, we've got, it looks like you're allowed 3 revisions. So how much of the architecture is tied into your development plan? For example, if you change your windows, you change your amount of transparency, as long as you're still compliant, but stuff is changing, is that considered a revision to your development plan?
That's,
Interesting.
I thought the development plan was more conceptual than.
Yeah.
You don't get,
I think once,
Doesn't have a transparency requirement, though.
yeah, I think. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, where did we land on when we were checking the transparency? I assumed that was something that was being checked by zoning with the building permit application.
I don't think we really landed on that. I mean, because this is something that's very different than what we are used to doing in the past. Because we typically, we would only run into these elevation issues in the ABC districts. And so as planners, we were very much focused on top-down plan view under our current code. And so I don't think we've landed on that for this new code. Because it is kind of hard. It is, I mean, the code actually calls out some very vertical elements. And so when those get incorporated and how they could affect the layout.
But let me, I think I know the answer to your question. All right, so what we're counting in terms of the number of submissions you can make are the formal submissions. I've submitted, I've gotten comments back, I'm now submitting my responses to those comments. So those are a set of formal submissions. You complete the development plan, you get that approved, you decide to make changes to your plans. At that point in time, it's simply a assessment. Are these major modifications that require an amendment to that plan? That's the assessment. And we would make that's ultimately a decision of the zoning administrator. You've made some changes, you're still consistent. Unlikely that we're gonna determine that's a major amendment that requires a resubmission and a start over of this
And
process.
that revision, that's going to apply to both development plans and the final site plan document. We received that comment as well. What we're trying to do there, our current code identifies that you get 2 bites at the apple to get your plan correct. That's not something that we have been wed to. But we're finding that there's a lot of challenge out there with the number of resubmissions that we continuously have. And it's because there's no penalty. And this provides an opportunity for the applicants to be serious about their submission. Because if they're not, then they're going to have to pay again if they can't get their act together. And that saves review time on our end, that saves their clients money. There's a lot of opportunity for efficiencies through enforcement of that. And so that is something that and at this point, we have a lot of support for doing that, because when we're on revision 10 of something, you know, I mean, that's years and years and years. And, you know, we're not, yeah.
I mean, it makes sense, this all makes sense. I just wanna, and I think it also, it is helpful that the building permit gets tied closer to the site plan submission, because it always happens in every job that we've worked on, the site plan's done. And we have to change it because the architecture had to change. And I mean, it's happening on a project I'm working on right now, which is, yeah. It's
Well,
frustrating.
and another thing that that ties into that is, if things change along the way, you may need to update your development plan.
Yeah.
But updating a development plan is gonna be a little bit more manageable than a full on site plan, unless you chose to go only the full on site plan route.
Okay, sorry, I'm gonna try and be quick with my comments. Talk about the model thing, on the historic review, if significant substantive modifications to the approved design are necessary due to development plan or final site plan, staff following consultation with administrator with the COA or cargo application. I just, procedure thing, I don't know how you guys are gonna do that, but who determines what's significant? Is it the planner's gonna determine that? Is the preservation planner gonna see every application and be able to make that determination? Or, is it gonna be pointed out to the preservation planner that these are the things that changed?
This
Is anything
is
bad?
very similar to current process.
Mhm.
That the preservation planner looks at iterations,
Mhm.
and when differences are found, then those are pointed out. So it's articulating, that's not gonna be a new thing that we're adding to the mix.
Right, I guess it just, if it's on the preservation planner to find all the differences and they're not pointed out to that person, stuff sometimes might fall through the cracks. And there's been some things that have happened in the site plan process where buildings that got a COA may not have gotten that COA had the site plan been understood at the beginning. If that makes sense, like there's been changes that have happened that the VAR probably would not have approved of.
Changes in the site plan review process?
That have occurred because of the site plan review process. It's usually stuff with
Okay, I got you.
trees or
Yeah,
landscaping,
yeah.
it usually involves the fire department, but it's
Correct me on anything I say wrong, Matt, as I go, but one of the things we're aiming for is by making the final site plan kind of a collection of plans and permits. So I've gone through the development plan, I've done I've got my zoning review in place. I'm now independently doing stormwater review, public facilities, and I'm also getting my COAs and any special exceptions or anything in that venue that I need to do. And then all of that comes together in the final site plan. One of the things that's allowing us to do is get away from iterative reviews where the planner has to go and look at, the only thing that's happening at this point as we're going through reviews 4, 5, and 6 is we're making tweaks to the stormwater system. And yet Matt has to look at each and every single one of those to make sure that a change isn't happening that is affecting the zoning, right? What a waste of Matt's time.
Yeah.
So what we're aiming for is he's out of that process. The final site plan comes in. It incorporates all of these previous plans are now bundled together into one final site plan. He does one review, goes through and says, okay, I see a place where a change has been made, we fix that, and off we go. Rather than him looking at iteration 4, iteration 5, iteration 6, and having to watch for this.
Yeah.
Because talk about an opportunity for things to be missed.
Right.
Because all they're talking about is stormwater. I've got this stack of things to look at. I'm not gonna look at iteration
right.
5. And then something changes and then, oh, that's a new comment. You know, there we go.
Just great. The historic conservation review, I thought we changed this in the code. It says 30 days for review. I thought that was, we turned it back to 60. The 30 days is problematic because the VAR cannot defer a project. So if an applicant doesn't show up, which has happened in the past, we just have to deny the project. Which is kind of just a waste.
For once, I thought, no?
Not under historic conservation districts.
So
Yeah, why are they different?
that is something that we saw in the code, and we've had lots of discussions about that. That'll have to be something that'll have to be addressed in the code update,
Okay, I thought.
because it
okay.
says 30 days in there.
It still says 30, okay, I thought we fixed that.
It sort of seems like maybe you could put in you have to go to the meeting, and if you're not there.
Well, I mean, if they don't show up, we just deny it.
Yeah,
But it's- it
and
just
that
kind
should
of
count as like,
works.
I don't know, not.
I think it may not matter, because at this point, I think historic conservation reviews are free anyways,
Yes,
so.
they
but if there
remain
ever is a
free
fee, it's
except for, like massive change.
Mhm.
What-
All right, well then I guess, never mind on that, signage, just a thought that, I mean, it looks like it's tied to the development plan. And if you change your signage, you have to modify your development plan. Does it make sense to tie signage to a development plan and to a site plan, or does it make sense for it just to be a separate permit process?
Signage is currently part of the site plan process. The sign, it's sign location. It's not like final design.
Okay,
And so that mirrors that process. And
Okay.
so they have to identify where those things are going to be. And then when they get ready to implement later down the road and they have all their approvals, then they come in for a sign permit.
What's the deal with the fees per sign thing?
That is what we currently have in place. It is a fee per sign. That is not a change.
The fee schedule should be noted. We basically kept it level. We had to rename some stuff. We had to, there were some new permits that didn't exist previously, and so we found the most similar permit and applied the fee to that. But the objective here was keep fees the same. We're not gonna try and increase fees. The only exception to that is that we created a new fee. If you're doing an after the fact permit submission, then we double the fee. And that's the way we treat building permits. If you come in and say, I already built this building, I forgot to get my building permit.
Yeah.
Yeah, slipped my mind. That's not usually how this goes. You then submit a building permit application and it's double the fee. We were looking at some other communities and they do the same thing for various zoning permits and stuff like that. So for example, if you go and clear cut your forest without coming in and getting your tree permits, the tree permit is doubled.
So that sort of reminds me, it does seem like we need some sort of emergency situation for tree permits. And you, I don't know, have your arborist or tree removal person sign an affidavit that said this thing had to go.
Right.
Then you
So
can do
there
it after
is,
the fact
the
without.
code specifically notes that if there is a in danger situation, tree, whatever, that it doesn't have to go through this permit process.
Oh, okay.
So again, a lot of the comments that we're receiving are things that can be answered through the code and as well as some of the other associated documents.
Cool.
So.
Who verified that? Like, what stops anybody from
Right.
saying it's an emergency?
It's always an emergency.
I was in danger of hating how that tree went.
I mean, yeah, I've got a bunch of comments on the tree thing, 'cause it just seems like one thing, I'm not sure how it's gonna be enforced, other than people tattling on each other.
That's how the zoning ordinance works today.
Yeah, don't underestimate that.
Well, no, but but I'm also worried about, again, someone in a single family residence, they have a tree in their backyard. And it's, it's a nuisance tree, it's gotta come down. And they have to, the way this is written, it says, you have to provide all the following. And I mean, so they have to show a plan of all the trees on their property and then have a tree replacement plan. And what if they don't want to replace the tree because it's overcrowded in their backyard? It Seems,
I mean, we can take the comment of reducing
Yeah.
the things that come out that are attached to that permit.
okay, I mean, it seems like the important thing would be to focus on trees that are in front yards.
Well, it's more about tree canopy as a whole city, right? It's
Mhm.
not just with the visual of the tree.
Really the only
I-
state
Yeah.
regulation we have.
The purpose
Yeah.
of the tree permit at the end of the day is to ensure that the tree that comes down doesn't create a zoning violation,
Mhm.
right? So if I was required to do a buffer between my
Yeah.
building and the next door and that incorporated a whole row of trees, it would be terribly embarrassing for the city, if 5 years later they went and cut down all the trees.
Mhm.
And there's a
That
host
makes
of those
sense.
examples,
Mhm.
including the canopy requirement. And technically, our existing zoning ordinance, right now, it says if you want to take down any tree in the city of Charlottesville, you have to submit a site plan.
Mhm.
That's what ours ordinance says today. Yep.
Over a certain caliber.
6 or 8 inch, I can't remember.
Same that we're using for the permit.
Yeah.
So we've reduced the requirement in this from what it is today.
You just call to attention to everybody that it exists.
15 inches, yeah.
The current
Which we
one-
originally had 15 inches in the draft, and I think we lowered it to,
Oh, yeah, probably due to comments received.
sure.
Well, so I definitely would change the language that says at a minimum, provide the following information. Because there's stuff in here that I think you're gonna find just isn't necessary for someone just trying to get rid of a junk tree in their backyard.
Right. And on the subject of like, just kind of heuristics in general, rather than counting every individual thing, like, I feel like I should be able to go on GIS and say, here's my 2022 aerial.
Yeah.
It's 90% tree canopy, clearly I'm over the 20% requirement. If it's, I don't know, probably over 30% or 40%, at some visual amount of,
Just
it's far
demonstrate
enough
here.
above that you don't need to figure out the specific number. Does that make sense?
I mean, it sounds like an evolution of where we'll go. I mean, there are some single family lots where there is a tree. And if they take that tree, they're definitely in violation. But again, in situations where they've got a wooded backyard and one tree needs to come down, there will be some grace.
We should make it clear, like, a planting plan is only necessary where taking down the tree results in a zoning violation.
And I will say the canopy, with the latest update from the tree commission on the appropriate tree list, that canopy has shrunk where normally you would have taken 3 trees to meet that 10%. Now it's gonna take 6 trees.
How does that work? Because each tree gets.
Each
the
tree
number we
has a number,
assign to
yes.
it.
Each tree, when you go into the master tree list, each tree has a coverage number that shows where it would be at 10 to 20 years. And that number has shrunk with the most recent update to the master tree list.
Did the trees shrink or were we inaccurate or?
I can't remember, I think it was inaccurate. I mean, it was like ideal condition and like it has everything it ever needs.
Hmm.
It's nothing around it.
Okay.
Where we listed.
What else you got?
Throw one out there
Yeah,
while
please
you're,
do.
the community meetings, while I am okay with, people developing big buildings getting yelled at, I do think we should allow those to be virtual. Not just because it's more convenient for people, but like it's more convenient for the neighbors to the extent that those tend to get a lot more actual participation from the community, which means they're more effective.
Hybrid.
You mean a hybrid? Yeah, I would agree with hybrid, not virtual.
I think there needs to be, little old ladies need to be able to walk into the room and talk.
Call-in option is a thing. I could live with call-in option, but
I'd go for hybrid.
I don't think you need a
I think
room.
I think
Some
you need,
people
I
don't.
think you need people in the room. Sure.
Yeah, I think, yeah. I think so. Page 21, reconcile number 4 and number 5. That's application deadlines, except as otherwise provided herein, the Administrative Planning Commission shall approve or disapprove the subdivision plat within 60 days after the date such application is submitted. Okay, then number 5, neither the administrator nor the planning commission shall be required to approve the subdivision efficient plat in fewer than 60 days after the date it was officially submitted. Well, if you have to approve it within 60 days, then you are in every case approving it. And you must approve it in fewer than 60 days. So,
This is state regulation language.
I don't get it. Why can't you do day 60?
well, if you're saying you must approve or deny it within 60 days,
Mhm.
you're not required to take action in fewer than 60 days.
Yeah, it's just saying the requirement is 60 days.
But if it's within 60 days, well, I'm saying it's very confusing as to what the issue, as to what the actual timeline is. We're saying we're not required to act in fewer than 60 days.
I think your confusion stems from the fact it's state law, which is written very poorly to begin with.
So, well, I mean, essentially, we're hanging our hat on within includes the number 60th day, as opposed to fewer than 60 days. So,
We should say the planning commission shall not be required,
in fewer than 60 days,
so they don't have to do it in.
except on day 60.
So that provision of state law is probably saying you can't pass a local ordinance to make it faster, to require it to be faster.
Yeah, so is that even
So maybe it's not
necessary to be in
relevant.
there?
Yeah,
I mean, 5 just comes out,
I'm sure this was in our prior ordinance.
and it was a good idea at the time.
The first iteration of this
Was it done?
is cut and paste out of our existing zoning ordinance into this document, and I'm sure this language was in our
Yeah,
existing
I mean, I
ordinance.
just don't think 5 is necessary.
Oh.
So something that several of the public have commented on, I see what they're saying. We're requiring in the minor development plan, a lot of information that only the city has. That they would have to come to the city, ask for the information, and then give the information that they just got from us. Could we just have the information and not involve them? Right.
I think, well, we should talk about that, because right now, what we do, let me use an example, building permits and floodplains. Right now, somebody submits a building permit, and there's somebody who looks to see if it's in the floodplain. And some of that is doable within our GIS system. I mean, from an ideal scenario, the version of this that I like is if we have the information, we're making it publicly available and pointing people to it so they can easily collect it without having to do a whole lot of work and then submit it, because that does give us the advantage that on the floodplain one, again, use that example. I'd hate to surprise, you now have to build your building with 2 feet of additional elevation because you're in the floodplain. Prefer that people figure that out on their own. The underlying comment is making sure that the minor development plan is easily, that one can easily pull together the information to submit it, because that's the one where we're expecting non-professionals to be putting together the materials. It also speaks to, I think, what Phil was talking about earlier, which what are the different educational tools we can use to make it, to help people understand how to do this stuff.
One of the areas that it would be a little bit of a concern, and we've run into this in the past, is, and this is why we no longer have the utility data on GIS, is because that data was being used in submittals instead of actually having those utilities marked. And so utilities felt they were concerned with that, they wanted the actual property owners to.
And to be fair, GIS has a blanket disclaimer.
Yeah, it does.
That this,
It's general.
It's not pretty, I mean, the property lines are not exact.
you
The lot size,
do not
yeah.
rely on this in lieu of blah, blah,
You just,
blah, blah. I mean, good idea, Charlie, but
But I think that information, we would accept that information again on that minor, like you're doing it.
unless you had some really good reason not to.
If you just went into GIS, printed out your aerial, and zoning could see that your deck's way off the property line and you just drew your deck in, that would, in most cases, be acceptable as a development plan.
So green, what are we missing?
I'm good, I think we answered a lot of my questions.
Wow, you've been unusually quiet today. What are we missing?
In general, that would work, makes sense.
You were looking for something else, Mr. Schwartz, did you find it?
I've got some, stuff that I can send by email, it's just typos and things like that.
Was it conceptual or is it pretty detailed? If it's high level, we'd like to hear it.
No, there's some areas that are just confusingly written,
Okay.
yeah.
Is there a reason that we can't submit a $100,000 bond? It has to be $100,001. Page 29.
Gonna have to ask Chrissy.
Page 29, such bond will be more than $100,000.
Probably state code.
Let's find out, because I learned the hard way that bonds at 100, there are a lot of folks, there is a change in their universe at $100,000 and $100,001 in underwriting, in security, and everything else.
I don't, and it's, again, we're stumbling through this too, because some of this stuff has been separated. I can't, for what we typically would bond, it's just trees and landscaping, never see hitting this amount.
Well, but it has to be more than $100,000.
Where this came from.
Yeah,
We'll look into it.
yeah, I mean, I'm okay with it being 100. No, I mean, with these smaller bonds, most of the time, this may be why it has to be $100,000. With smaller bonds, you essentially have to have liquid assets to cover it. So you might as well just show up at NDS and hand them a certified check. You just say, hold on to this.
We have a closet with bags of cash? No, we don't.
Just have a safe.
Couple plat things, one on the list of requirements on page 20-ish, 2021. It's like 10 things in your final plat. In the current ordinance, which it's also, it says, I left and go a bunch of the bonding ordinance, but it says the agent can grant exceptions or whatever, and we removed that. I don't know if the agent ever, the subdivision agent, staff, I don't know.
Can create exceptions to plating requirements.
Yeah. So probably wanna stick that back in here. I mean, if they're ever used, I probably, I don't know. And then there are a bunch of places in that whole section where it says subdivision code. Which I assume is copied from the old code, but now it's just the development code, right? Or the subdivision portion of the development code.
We could reference the chapter and probably should.
Yeah. It's 29-111C is the part with the variations or exceptions to submission requirements. Actually not requirements of the plan. I think it's just
Really minor, just under the historic review. In the case of a demolition request for structural integrity is at issue, the application.
Where's this?
This is under the historic 2.2. It's for demolition. So in the case of a demolition request for structural integrity is at issue, the applicant shall provide a structural evaluation and cost estimates for rehabilitation prepared by a professional engineer. I'm sure that's probably in our existing code. Is there a reason to require cost estimates? And is that rehabilitation just to make it structurally sound, or is that to make it
You can't knock it down.
occupiable?
The engineer says, we spend $2 million, you can preserve this historic structure, go and do it, don't knock it down.
But it just seems like it's, the engineer is not the one who can make a cost estimate. That's you're gonna have to get a contractor involved at that point. I'm just wondering if that's
those companies.
how necessary that requirement is. And that may be a question for Jeff Warner.
It may be, yeah.
Or
This seemed odd to me.
I'm guessing this is conservation districts, we say you only need that estimate if it's not your primary residence. If it's structurally sound, you're not living in it.
But if you are living in it, it's all different.
That's where it's a vacation.
But not an Airbnb.
Rory, come on, it's gotta be something else.
Yeah, got plenty of things in the ADU or manual, you guys can talk about that.
That's not even.
About that. I don't know if this is a manual thing. Critical slopes, I thought we were making that a hearing. And then I read the manual and it says, no hearing required, just a meeting or something, just notice. And then I went back to the ordinance and it says, it does not say hearing, except then it does sort of say hearing. Because staff will provide a staff report and recommendations to the planning commission in advance of the public hearing. But it doesn't say public hearing. Do we change our minds and say no hearing anymore?
No, I think the critical slope.
No, it's not a hearing.
It's
We,
not?
we have debated this back and forth
Have we?
and back and forth. Yeah,
Alright.
it became a special exception and special exceptions are not hearings. They're public meetings that are advertised that everyone can come to. So,
So it's back to what it is now.
What is the?
It still comes to planning commission and city council, so all.
So it's back to the same thing it is now. It just doesn't require a hearing. They have to speak in matters spoken by the public.
As long as we get to have a say.
Except then we left that one bit that says in advance the public hearing. So put that on your list of things to clean up.
Okay, but that does mean that, I mean, it's also always the chair's discretion. If there's a whole bunch of people there, somebody comes up, then the chair always has the discretion to open it.
Yeah. All
I
right.
remember at one point we were trying to pull out the environmental and more stormwater related stuff of critical slopes.
Yes, that's another project.
Yeah.
For temporary use permits, my understanding that that could be a hand sketch, the type of things that are requested on there.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, 2.6.4. It looks like it can, I guess I'm thinking if somebody wants to do a block party or something, is that a temporary use permit or?
That's what falls into temporary use permits. Food trucks, I think, fall in there. I mean, yes, I think it's a hand sketch type of thing. I wonder if that's even waivable.
There's a whole list of things that are required, but it looks like you could do that as just a sketch.
Could you remind me, what's the difference between special use and special exception?
Special use permit deals with the uses. So it's a use where you wanna, where there's needs to be an opportunity for some discretionary special consideration. Special use permit does have a public hearing associated with it. Special exception is for physical dimensional aspects.
Yeah, this is something new, so that I might want to talk about this because we've never had this before. This body is very familiar with special use permits coming in front of you, mainly to get changes to the zoning where they're asking for the special use because they had that caveat that they could also, in addition to getting special use, ask for changes to setbacks, height, parking, and an issue. So this separates it out. So now someone can come forward and just say, I want city council to make changes to dimensional requirements. And it'll go through the very similar path to a special use, but it'll, yes, in a public hearing, but it would come before this body for a recommendation.
But it has to do with dimensions, massing, things like that.
Setbacks,
Setbacks.
it says any physical characteristic can be altered by city council,
except for
except for
the ones
density.
listed.
Density and
There's a handful of,
floors. Yeah, floor, height can, but floor can't, so you can.
So at what point does the BZA's responsibility end and the planning commission's responsibility begin?
That's an
on special
interesting
exception?
question, right? Because all of the things that are subject to special exception one could pursue a variance to seek those. And the notion was, and I think why there was advocacy, frankly, within the development community for the special exception process, is that the standard of review is less than a variance, right? Because a variance is a hardship standard.
Okay.
And so if you were only reliant on a variance, then you would have to demonstrate hardship.
And if you swing and miss at BZA, you gotta go to court. There isn't something in the city to. The appeal is to the circuit court, not to somebody else.
Well, with special exception, you're going all the way to city council
Right.
to get the decision.
Right, but with the BZA, if you don't make it on the BZA, you don't go anywhere else, you go to the circuit court, you gotta go to, and you have to have a judge figure it out. Which nobody makes.
And with special exceptions, is it of conditions or proffer?
Conditions.
So let's talk about the official submission date. We got some concerns about that. Gotta love when people send us emails in the middle of a meeting. So if an application is deemed completed prior to the next submission deadline date, the application will be given that date as there's a typo, official submission date. And then all deadlines are based on that, and then we have the whole chart of dates. So I get that when it's like related to something that has to go for like a hearing or to a meeting or whatever. What's driving that for something like a site plan review? And in this email we just got, Scott Collins very conveniently after the meeting started, he says, it might be helpful to everybody, including staff, for that not to all bunch everything up, because then things get bunched up and then you have 5 things you have a deadline on the same day, rather than everything being staggered. You guys have thoughts on that?
Yes. Consistency. We would like to actually create this consistency. So if you know you are submitting and you have a submittal date, let's use the 1st and 15th as an example. You know you're getting your comments on very specific dates, instead of this running, chasing the rabbit. Well, I turned this in on the 2nd. It was reviewed for completeness, so maybe 8-10 days after that. So it's at the date. So now I'm expecting my comments back at a different date. So we're trying to create clarity that this is very specific use, and I believe the county might use a system. In our current code actually was worded this way. It was to have submittal dates, not you submit, that's the date. There was submittal dates that became everything tied to that date. And so we are trying to create this consistency of, I know as a developer, I submitted, my submittal date is always X. So I know I'm going to get comments on always Y.
Okay. Now I'm sort of confused. Sorry, we're saying the completion determination and fee schedule are division 5.2.c, which is not in this document. Is that in the code?
It's good. That's the other weird thing about this document. You do have to look at this document with the code next to it.
We have a fee schedule with the code.
We have an update. We have a regular fee schedule now. We have an updated fee schedule going to council on February 1st that reflects the new code.
There's not a fee schedule in the code.
Oh, it just talks about a fee schedule.
Yeah, no, it's established by the.
The code has to enable the ability to collect fees.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Wow.
Something we've done just on that topic, inconsistently is we've exempted, affordable housing from certain fees. Water hookup fees jumps to mind, and I think some others as well. Can that be a consideration?
I think that is one of the things that Office of Community Solutions is looking at on their side, yeah. The state enables a municipality to do a blanket exception for affordable housing projects. I don't know precisely how that's defined.
What are the odds we can accommodate, say, an expedited review? Which is in the existing code, right? Well, maybe it gets you some sort of quicker turnaround on your site plans or something.
It does, it's 21 days.
21 under current code. The one thing too, I will state, this is really, talking about development plans. Again, it's hard to kind of separate these things out, you know, the talking about the development plans. And typically, and this goes back to kind of that full review cycle and what Missy was saying earlier. I don't think we anticipate hitting for development plans. And when you look at historically our review, your zoning stuff is typically met after 1 or 2 rounds. When we get into that 8 and 9 round, it's all stormwater constructability. So we actually are anticipating this going smoother. You know, you're getting this development plan through in 1 or 2 rounds because that under our current situation, that 36-page plan that gets dropped on our desk, 2 or 3 sheets of that are the development plan. And so pulling that out, and that should get approved fairly quickly. I can't speak to the other stuff yet because that's a little more difficult.
Encouraged everyone by saying this is going, we anticipate this will be moving smoothly.
Well, the example I always give when I'm talking to clients too, if I've told you 4 times you can't build a McDonald's here, and you keep submitting to McDonald's, we have a larger issue.
So this schedule and stuff, like stormwater is now not part of the development plan, right? It's
So it's not part of the development, it is part of the final site plan, right? That's where that's where it comes back together. The final site plan is a collection of plans and permits.
Yep. But we don't have that schedule and stuff under final site plan, maybe, no, we do. Do we?
No.
I don't know. This,
No.
I assume some sort of schedule has to apply to the stormwater reviews.
It does, and it's actually, I think, if I
It's
remember correctly,
different.
stormwater is different from the
Yeah,
site plan
they
review
have,
schedule.
they have state regulations that actually do not line up with
Right.
site plan.
That's fun. Should we, is it worth getting that in here just so people know, or
Yeah, we're
we
also,
figuring people who submit stormwater permits, you know, that stuff anyway,
well,
because they hopefully read the.
they've read all the state
Stormwater.
regulations and are deeply familiar with that. I think that's one of the conversations we're going to be having with our colleagues in the other departments, whether they would prefer to have that live in the SADM manual.
Which we revise every year, it's a living document.
I mean, what,
Rather than yes.
what we are hoping, you know, one of the goals we're hoping with this is under state regulation, we can't prevent someone from coming in and dropping off all their documents and saying, here's my final site plan. And it goes through each of its process. One of the goals our department has in this is that we're trying to use a carrot to say, if you get your development plan approved first, go through that process first. That's something you could take to a bank and say, this is a viable development, I can get my loan. And then if you get that approval and then come back and submit these other documents, we'll review your building permit at the same time that these other things are going through the process. Because currently what we do right now is we say you have to have an approved site plan before building will even start looking at your building plans. Because they don't want to do that till they know there's an approved document. So that's one hope that I'm curious to see how this is in a few years, if it's helping with that.
I know for LIHTC, you need a site plan. Actual site plan.
It's an interesting question, though. I haven't read the rules, regulations on LIHTC. What do they mean by site plan? Right? There's a variety of definitions of site plan out there. I can tell you in Massachusetts, a site plan did not include stormwater.
Yeah. Worth looking.
Virginia's the only place where I've worked where people say, oh, my site plan has a stormwater plan associated with it. Massachusetts, those were separate documents completely. And the site plan always had to go through the planning commission before it could be signed. And nobody even started a stormwater plan. Well, I shouldn't say it started. Nobody submitted a stormwater plan before planning commission signed off on their site plan.
All right, we got 29 minutes. Any questions before we go into the development code? He's gonna talk about the development code. Here we are.
I'm anxious for that part.
Mhm.
I'm anxious to move on to that.
Let's go.
Patrick, can you call up the presentation, please?
And then for maps, I've got Patrick has those so we can display those instead of copies.
Fair enough.
So.
Yep. All right, so the request I received was to do a run through of what changes council incorporated into the development code when they adopted it on December 18th. So I kept this relatively simple and high level, and just kind of listed off those changes for all of you. So Patrick, slide please. Yes, please put it sideways.
Long day.
So I just did this chapter by chapter, introductory provisions, the very first chapter of the zoning ordinance. As you guys are all aware, one of the things we established was the effective date will be February 19th. 60 days, I think 60 days plus one of the adoption date of December 18th. And then also there's language in the introductory provisions that allowed us to do, I called it here expanded vesting. Basically, Virginia state law doesn't provide any vesting for submitted site plans. If you've submitted a site plan and the rules change before you get that site plan approved and you have no other significant governmental action, then that site plan under state law has no utility. It has to be consistent with whatever the change in zoning is. We made the argument that we should allow for some form of what's called legislative vesting to go above and beyond the state requirements for site plans that have been submitted. In short, the cutoff that was selected was August 31st. So all site plans that were submitted before August 31st are vested and will continue forward under the existing zoning ordinance. Those submitted after that have to switch
They're
to the new
vested
zoning ordinance.
or until when?
Well, that's a good question. So the resolution that accompanied the adoption of the zoning ordinance that established essentially the rules for this vesting say that you have to continue to make diligent efforts towards the approval of that site plan. And you have to, and then the whole thing has to be approved. I think the cutoff date is end of June of 2025. So you do have to get your site plan approved within a certain amount of time and continue to make progress towards approval of that site plan. Once the site plan is approved, it is, it's what you can build, and it's I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. It's grandfathered under the zoning under which it was approved.
Doesn't it have an expiration?
Yes,
5 years?
it depends.
Oh, yeah, once you have a site plan approved, you have a certain amount of time to then build under, yes, that's established. Under
Yeah,
the
the
ordinance.
state's been continuing to expand that deadline, so we have things that have been approved since '07 that are still valid due to state changes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So
Yeah.
just walk me through, like, if somebody submitted something November 1st, what happens to their stuff?
It has to be consistent with the Charlottesville Development Code, yeah.
So maybe this doesn't matter.
Well, or
but-
actually, let me clarify that. Because the effective date of the ordinance is not until February 19th. If someone submitted something on November 1st and got their site plan approved before February 19th, it would be approved under the zoning ordinance. So that is,
I'm assuming nobody's gonna have accomplished that.
yeah, but remember, this is also applicable to like building permits.
Yeah.
Right, we are still accepting building permits and approving them under the existing zoning ordinance all the way up until February 19th.
What does it do to their resubmission schedule? Like, is their last submission the one after this one that expires? We return it and say, oh, there's a new ordinance now, it doesn't comply with that, and then,
I don't know, we'll probably work it out on a case by case basis.
okay.
What about site plans that they've gotten their preliminary approval or whatever, or they've gotten approval before this date, and then they need to make an amendment?
The amendment would have to be based on the new code.
Because our ordinance doesn't actually, our existing ordinance and the proposed, none of those actually recognize amendments. Minor modifications would remain within the, if you're doing what's under, what our code refers to as a minor modification, that would still be under the existing code.
Okay.
Do we know how many projects this is gonna affect?
6.
What happens to, sorry, I'm not having a question, like Langford or like a recent thing that we saw, is that affected the project that came?
That
That
will,
Is
that,
gonna get a rezoning, which is a significant governmental action, so it'll be vested by virtue of that action. So anything that's received an SUP or rezoning or anything along those lines is vested.
It's vested, but the building forms and stuff have to match.
Well,
you-
we'll have to understand if it's vested under the old code.
Okay.
So maybe this doesn't matter because the actual submission deadline is February 28th, but it's not February 19th, right? Because there's 31 days in December and January, so it's gotta be like the 16th.
With
Right.
a specific date was
They put a
established.
date.
February 19th is
Never
an
mind.
established date in the code.
Okay, 63 days.
This is all new information, yes. This was not the packet.
This
No,
presentation.
no,
was
the
not
presentation was
done.
done back in there.
All right, slide, please, Patrick. All right, changes to districts and uses. You guys may recall that you guys had approved a limited degree of commercial uses within residential districts. That idea did not make it through the process with city council. City council introduced the notion of step backs within entrance corridors. In the NX3 district, they allowed for both indoor and outdoor recreation entertainment uses by SUP. We expanded homestays to include the RX districts. I think this is really just to remain consistent with our existing allowances for homestays. And then we included a clarification that research laboratories are allowed as a general office use. So those are the changes to our districts and our uses.
So the entrance corridors have a required step back,
They do,
okay. All right,
as opposed to a special permit,
Okay.
which was part of what was
Oh, okay.
discussed at one point.
Step back to the 3rd story, right?
I believe it was third story.
I thought it was the-
Now I don't remember, actually. It was
There was a
discussed.
whole.
All right, slide please, Patrick. And within development standards, we had changes in the affordable dwelling unit chapter, which removed the distinction between ownership and rental units. So without that distinction, 10% of units at 60% of AMI for 99 years in all the mixed-use districts, which are the bulk of our districts. And then bonus units in the residential districts are at 80% of AMI for 30 years. The other thing that happened was in the streetscape requirements, a new category of streetscape was identified for basically for Route 29, the entrance corridor portion of Route 29. It's labeled the mixed use corridor and it has an 8-foot walk zone and a 12-foot greenscape. Slide.
Didn't occur to me at the time, but I almost wonder if it would have been better to move 2 of those into walk and then it would be a shared use path width. If it were 10 and 10 rather than 8 and 12. You could, I mean, obviously you have to do it along a whole block for that to be useful, but
Well, that's kind of what the streetscape is called for, right? They're meant to match up.
yeah, Yeah.
Interesting point.
we'll revisit that, I
Yeah.
guess.
See
in
what happens
the
as we
year.
go forward. And then in the administration section, the only change there was with regard to BAR decisions, some additional clarity, if you will, or limits on BAR's discretion relative to regulating height, primarily also step backs. I can share this presentation.
Mr. Schwartz.
well, we actually, at our last BR meeting, looked at a, proposal for an apartment building that wraps around Mel's Diner. And it was interesting that the BAR was fully supportive of all 7 stories of the proposal. But I will note that the the 25-foot thing, the step back, there is an existing historic building on the corner of Eighth and West Main. That means that the developer had wanted to tear down half that building. And the BAR said, no, you should keep it and build behind it. And this means that they get to tear down half that building.
No, it doesn't, because you can just say you can't demolish it, right? Which is a separate
Well, they're gonna
ability.
build on top of it and whatever. I mean, it's gonna be, that's gonna be interesting.
Well, you know, let's offline, I'd like to understand.
Okay, but this is interesting, and I thought you guys would be interested to hear that, yeah, we're already getting tested with our new code, and I think it was a good discussion. I think it's working out. The developer seemed content with the discussion, actually seemed happy with it.
It's interesting. It's good. Patrick Side?
I love else, that seems pretty good.
All right, zoning maps, so we have them available if you guys want to look at them in detail, but there were several reductions in allowed density in various parts of the city. There were corresponding to that, some additions to the RNA districts in Rose Hill. And then there was the establishment of the corridor overlay, which was where you guys also were talking about putting it, but on Cherry and Preston.
Plus, the area east
Oh,
of Norfolk
yes.
Southern, so Reed's, Bodos, King Lumber.
Yes, they included that whole area, and they also went down Rose Hill Ave a little bit. So we have all those maps if anyone wants to look at those at any point in time. So looking ahead, there's a pretty extensive list of things still to do. I referred to this, everything to do with the zoning ordinance as kind of learning, reviewing, and evolving the system. Some of the things we know are already on our dance card in this regards are affordable dwelling units. We're looking at an annual review of the manual. I would not hesitate to include within that the notion of making changes to the ordinance itself as well. Second item, we already have talked about coming back to the homestays. I think one of the things we did not do in this drafting of the zoning ordinance was make any changes to our home-based business regulations, particularly with the notion of not including commercial uses within the residential. We may want to look again at the home-based business ordinance and how that could be modified. And then, as has been talked about at this table a lot, considerations of further map amendments in the zoning. And then I call these adjacent projects. We've got a lot of these as well. We talked about environmental regulations. We need to look at how we treat stormwater. There's a lot of interest in green building incentives or requirements, something in that realm. There's a lot of interest in re-looking at critical slopes and different approaches towards that idea. So there's a lot of work in this space. We've got historic district design guidelines that need to be updated, right, Carl?
Yes,
There we go.
in progress.
Yep. One of the ideas, we talked about this a little bit earlier this evening, the idea of pre-permitted building types, particularly around accessory dwelling units like backyard cottages and those types of things, but there's a whole wide range of areas that could go into. And then broadly, I included in here this idea of education and support. What I'm getting at is I've really come to think about this new zoning ordinance, the new development code, as a new operating system for land use and development within the city. Anytime you adopt a new operating system, right, Rory, that needs to come with education and support for all of your users.
Well, not Rory, but.
I was gonna say something.
Spoken as a man who's obviously never put a Linux box together in his bedroom.
Well, if I'm putting it together, that's not who the education and support needs to be targeted towards. Education and support needs to be targeted towards our users, the development community, the residents of the city, and also frankly to staff who have to turn this around and turn it and make sure it's a coherent permitting system going forward. So this is, education support is gonna be an ongoing and important aspect of this. And included in that is the notions we were talking about earlier at the table about how do we make it, one of the things this zoning ordinance does, what the component plan set us up for, what the zoning ordinance does is theoretically make it easier for small scale developers to be able to operate in the city and bring in infill development projects. But that also requires us to think about how we can provide additional support to small scale developers, because frankly, the whole system of development review broadly here and really all over the place is set up to steer you towards large projects with development teams that have lots of money to do that. And we're looking at a different system. And so what are the tools we can put into place to support that small scale developer to be able to do infill projects here? So that's it. That's the whole thing.
I have a question on the ownership rental thing. So what are they doing with the ownership? How does that work? I'm confused by that.
How do you mean?
If someone
You should be.
buys a townhome.
Yeah.
Are you selling a townhome that's for somebody who's at 60% AMI? I'm assuming, like
Yeah.
your affordable townhome.
Yeah.
What is that person, what are they obligated to? Do they have to sell it to another person that's at
That'd be the
60%?
notion, yeah, they have to sell it then to somebody who also qualifies for 60% AMI unit.
So they're selling it below market? How does, okay.
It's creating a permanent supply of affordable ownership units.
Yeah, identifiable, stigmatizable, point toable, not appreciating in value buildings. So if you're at 60% AMI, you're not allowed to benefit from the general market.
There's clearly some disagreement around this issue.
Yeah. So. The problems with that are, there are. I could give you 20,000 words on why this is a bad idea. I won't.
So, on a slightly different subject, the subject of evolving, can we talk very briefly about this thing that Riverbend is doing in their sort of site plan that wasn't vested, that got submitted to BAR for the CFA lot? So it looks like what they're doing, you guys might need to get a little closer here. You were there, you reviewed it. They subdivided off this parcel, which is like a tiny strip of land along Lexington.
That, yes.
And it seems like they're doing it in order to get around the frontage or the setback requirements, the build-to requirement, and potentially even the transparency requirements and all of those things, because they're not building on that lot, and this lot is now a mid-block lot.
So
And I mean,
that is, the comment has been provided during the site plan review that does not meet the lot standard.
So in the new lot standards, do we require it to be buildable or have a certain width? No.
I don't recall off the top of my head if it says buildable lot. I hope it does.
Yeah,
This
that's what
was
I'm worried
submitted
about.
under this was submitted.
This is
under
the old
existing-
ordinance,
Yeah.
which did require buildable lots. I don't know how they got away with that, but
Well,
but
that's
it
not
made
the-
me
that's
worry
not-
that in the new ordinance, this could be a thing.
There's no approval of that item. They're still working through site plan review, and there's a comment that is specific to the fact that that is not a buildable lot.
Yeah. So I think the new ordinance might allow it. That's where I got really worried.
So your concern is that we're gonna have this raft of 12-foot wide, 200-foot long lots that are put into play for the specific purpose of dodging various zoning bullets.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why they would honestly in this case, except that they seem to want to set their building back beyond the build to line for some reason.
Yeah, no, that's what it was. They wanted to have a deeper front yard for all these units.
So they're being cute.
I
I mean.
mean, they
Although
could,
contextually, it, as far as the BAR is concerned, what they were proposing makes more sense than building out to the street.
Because the adjoining property.
So that was an interesting conversation. Yeah, I do remember that. I remember calling them out on it, and they had a very convincing argument that it would work. So I'll be curious to know how it works out in the site plan process.
yeah, I mean, and they could make their greenscape bigger in their like streetscape part to set the building back further from this curb.
There are also access issues with the proposal that are provided, so there are a number of comments that have to be resolved.
Yep, and I mean, now it's, they were after the vesting deadline, right? So they've got to resubmit another new one unless they get approved in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But, so I mean, this project aside, though, I got worried about that concept, yeah.
I don't know, we'll take a look at it. There seems to be so many other ways of dealing with the issue that actually subdividing a narrow strip seems like kind of an obtuse way to deal with the issue. I mean, in the code, there's so many different ways of dealing with the issue.
So this might be reflected, well, I mean, this is the old code, but under the new code, we don't understand how to do it in the new code yet, so, yeah,
Which comes back to that notion of education and support.
well, and just doing it. And sitting with the new code.
Right, right.
So a brief word about the new ordinance. It is not perfect. We didn't expect it to be perfect, but it is good. It's far better than what we had. And it is a living, breathing document that we can fix as we move along. And I like the fact that we had 5 councils vote in favor of it. So at the end of the day, I am pleased with the current iteration of the document. And again, it is an iteration, so we will have a chance to do some other things.
I would certainly like to sign on to your optimism in that. So I shall choose to do so.
Right, I think we're pretty much wrapped, Mr. Toronto, do you have a motion?
Actually, I was delighted to discover in the last hour that apparently January 23rd is National Measure Your Feet Day, so I've got something to do when we go home. Let's adjourn.
Second. We are adjourned, thank you guys.
I was worried for a second.